All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS office hours. Today is Saturday, April 26th of 2025, and looking ahead here, we have a ton of DFS action coming at you today. We decided to move the show up about 30 minutes because I realized that NHL, MLB, and NBA were all locking at 1 p.m. Eastern today, so the show's at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, might put people in a pinch trying to get their lineups in, so didn't want anybody to have that burden, so decided to move the show up slightly here so we could answer questions, do a slate demo, and then give people some time to simply just focus on their lineups. So appreciate you guys being flexible with me and still tuning in to the show, starting 30 minutes early. But there is, like I said, NBA, NHL, MLB, Xfinity today, Cup race tomorrow, UFL, MMA, ton of DFS action coming at you all weekend long. If you guys aren't signed up with us, want to check us out, we do have a 5-day, no strings attached free trial. I always recommend people get started on the weekend, get access to all the weekend sports, takes you into the middle of the week there. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew, one of the coaches over here at SaberSim. This is a show where we go over how to use the SaberSim app, answer any and all DFS related questions. Get your questions in one of three ways here. First off, send us an email, support@sabersim.com. Second, post it live in the YouTube chat. Third way, post it in the office hours channel in our Discord server. If you're not in our Discord and want to get access to that channel, there is a link in the description of this video. You also get access to our similar channels, individual sport channels, and you get access to the rest of the SaberSim team. Just can't say enough good things about the Discord. But with that said, we do this show Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern, and then we do the show here on Saturdays, typically 12:30 p.m. Eastern. I actually might change that. I think it's like the second week in a row where slates have locked. I think, 1 p.m. Eastern is like a pretty common time for MLB slates to start. So we're going to figure it out and possibly move it. I'll let people know. I'll talk about it internally, see what we want to do there. But either way, let's get SaberSim up. And let's start answering some questions. This one from Jake here. Yeah, super interesting. So Jake said, what's with batter prices on FanDuel? So FanDuel messed up. FanDuel made a mistake here. And for like the very early slate, if you guys are playing over on FanDuel, they are pricing their batters incorrectly. So we're actually a little concerned that they're going to take the slate down. I don't know if they've done that or not. It doesn't seem like they have, but obviously it is not a good thing here. So if you just go to like batters, I believe it's the Cleveland-Boston game specifically. This game is a double header. So I think maybe something went wrong on the FanDuel side with the double header today, and they messed up salaries for these players. So Jose Ramirez, 9,500 salary, over on the Boston side. Jarren Duran, 9,500, right? All of these guys like priced 2-3 times as much as they usually are. So kind of unfortunate situation here. These guys will probably get a lot less ownership if they end up leaving the slate up. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. But yeah, they seem like a pretty hard fade for me if you guys are playing this slate, and if they do end up running it, right? So I don't know what's going to happen there, but yeah, FanDuel pricing. We checked this morning. We're like, whoa, did something go wrong on our end here? But we like went over to FanDuel. We're like, oh no, this is what they're showing. So is what it is at the moment. But yeah, so you're going to see super weird salaries for Boston, Cleveland for the FanDuel very early only slate. All right. Good first question there. Avery said, I just joined yesterday. Welcome. Could you explain the difference between adjusting my projection versus adjusting min exposure when I want to get more of a player? For sure. Yeah. So it's going to depend what you're trying to do, right? So for me, if you're like, hey, I want this player and I know I want them in, 20% of my lineups or something like that, right? The best thing to do is simply to just set the minimum exposure. Minimum exposures are like hard and fast rules. Like, okay, we're going to get you 20 minimum no matter what. Projections work a little bit differently. You're telling the builder, hey, I think this player is going to do better than you expect them to do, but that doesn't automatically mean you're going to get more of them, right? So the way I kind of use the two is if I want somebody in my lineups and I know I will just set a minimum exposure. But if I think a player's projection is wrong or I want to, make it better or something like that, right? Maybe I don't think Jokic is going to play 40 minutes. Maybe I think he's going to play 42 minutes. I think that Denver's going to play their stars and they're going to get less rest, right? So I think it's a really important game and I think he's going to play more. Okay, well then I would boost his projection, trying to give the builder a more accurate input and then let it decide what to do with it, right? So when you adjust projections, that doesn't guarantee you're going to get more of the player. It generally means that you will, right? But it's not for sure. Like I've definitely been in situations where I'm like, okay, I'm going to take this player and I'm going to boost them 2 points, and then I run a build and I let the builder interpret that information, and it still doesn't give me that much exposure to them, right? I kind of take I personally leave it in that situation, right? Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give the builder the most accurate information to analyze. So like the builder is taking your projection adjustment and it's saying, okay, even with this adjustment, I still don't think they should be in that many lineups. I only think they should be in this many lineups, right? It can sometimes feel bad when that happens. So, if you still just like want to get a player, that's where minimum exposure comes into play more. Now, sometimes you're going to boost projections and like sometimes somebody's going to go, from like 10% exposure to like 50% exposure, right? You got to figure out like, hey, did I make too big of an adjustment in this case? And should I lower it? Did I boost him 3 points and maybe I should drop him to 1.5 point boost and rerun, right? Like maybe your adjustment was so aggressive that it's causing this player to be in almost like too many lineups, right? So kind of got to have a little bit of like touch and feel with that. If I had to make any recommendations, 1 to 2 fantasy point adjustments are like pretty good. If you want to think about it like percentage wise gets a little bit harder. Making like a 10% adjustment to somebody like Dylan Brooks at like 18 points, it's like 1.8. So that's like, under 2 points. But then you make a 10% adjustment to Jokic and you take him from 60 to 66. That's like massive, right? So I like to just work a little bit more with like whole numbers here. 1 to 3 points is probably more than enough in like projection adjustments, but that's the difference, right? Minimum maximum exposure is more direct. Projection adjustments, you're telling the builder more your opinions, but you're still letting it do what it kind of wants to do. So good question there. All right. So I'm gonna avoid the FanDuel early only slate, and I'm gonna do a slate demo here for the 4-game NBA main slate starting in a little bit here. So we're caught up with questions at the moment. If any more questions roll in, we'll hit them as we go. But in the meantime, we're going to do a slate demo. So 4-game NBA main slate here. Always build the max number of lineups your plan allows. I'm just going to build 500 for the sake of time. I would probably leave the minimum salary here. It is a 4-game slate, so it's a little different. I wouldn't be opposed to like slightly raising it if you want. I think this default is like probably fine. I'm not going to set any filters or rules. These playoff slates have a little less value. There is some value, right, coming from Memphis. I think this is their first game without Ja Morant, right? Ja got hurt last game, hip injury. He's supposed to be out today. So it makes a little bit of sense why, we're seeing 1, 2, 3, 4 out of the top 7 values are Memphis, right? That kind of makes some sense here. So anytime, you're trying to get a feel for a slate, right? Trying to get an idea of like where the best plays are, sorting by value is always a really good option. And then you're like, okay, I'm seeing a bunch of Memphis, then what I would do is I would filter for them and I would go and look. I'm like, hey, why am I seeing so much Memphis, right? And I sort here and it's like, oh, Ja Morant's out today. I forgot he got hurt last game, right? So even if you didn't know he got hurt, you could still see that he was out, which is highly impactful. So either way, we get a feel for the slate, right? An idea of like who's out. Another thing I like to do, sort by questionables, right? Go to status, right? Click on it, click on questionables. Are there any big name players that who might sit out? I think Jimmy Butler is like actually a very, very his status is in like serious jeopardy for today. At least that's what they were saying. He had like some glute contusion or like bruise or something like that I think it took him out of like the last game. So this is like a really big deal, the Jimmy Butler status. This gets like really interesting actually, because there's like some serious, kind of game theory stuff to think about with this being the last game on the slate, right? So some people might want to like take a shot and be like, hey, I think he's going to play. I think he's not going to play. If you expect him not to play and you're right, you probably, get like a really big edge there, considering he's expected to be like 20% owned. People are just going to have less swap options at like that point. So kind of an interesting thing with like Jimmy Butler. I don't really know what the status is of like Garland, Porter, Westbrook are. Those are like some other big names here that seem impactful. Kennard seems impactful too with his ownership, probably benefiting from Morant being out. But knowing who the questionable players are, who you need to keep your eye on, another really good, important thing to do, right? I would recommend, if anybody doesn't, know where to look for that information, the Basketball Monster news dashboard is really good, right? You go to this news section, they have like the players, and like it seems like Darius Garland is like a true game time decision, and then some other info about what other players in other games are still pending, right? So that's what one resource I'd be using there. All right, but those are big things. So Memphis value, couple big questionables here. If I was actually, building for this slate, right, I would wait, or I probably wouldn't wait. What I would do is I would just get like an initial run in, right? I would build some lineups and submit them just so I have something in place in the fantasy site in case anything comes up, in case my internet goes out, in case anything random happens, right? Just get some lineups in. But then I would wait to do my final run, right? I would make sure, since Garland is on Cleveland and this is the first game of the day, I would make sure he is playing. Lineups are going to come out. Lineups will be confirmed in the app. You'll see the check marks next to the teams. You'll see the check marks for the players in the status column. I would make sure all of that goes through before doing my final run. So you just want to make sure that, you have the latest and greatest info. But if he ends up being in, then it shouldn't matter. But if he ends up being out, that's obviously impactful, and you want to do a rebuild there. So that's the big thing to be aware of, is just the check marks and making sure lineups are confirmed. But either way, we can kick off this build now. So let's run some lineups for this 4-game NBA main slate. And lineups are finishing now. We do have in the settings section the run contest sim automatically after build button on. So our default contest sim that is up here is going to just kick off automatically. And then once it finishes, it even switches sorting metrics for you automatically too. So it switches straight to our ROI for the contest sim, which is great. Here, I'm going to set up a couple of aggregate metrics. Average ROI and average projection are the ones I prefer. I'm going to sort by exposure. I like to move some columns around. I mostly just want to be able to see my exposure, my leverage, my pool percentage, which is just the exposure that the player has in all of my lineups, all of my 500, not only my top 20. But I'm about ready to start analyzing this, right? So sorting correctly, a couple data points I like to use. Say I'm building 20 lineups. I got my exposures, got my leverage, which is just exposure minus ownership. So telling you what players you're high or low on. This all looks good to me, right? So where I normally start is just getting some diversification in my lineups, cranking up this min uniques, right? The min uniques is going to make sure that the lineups you are looking at have Sorry, say that again. If I set this to 2, it's going to make sure all 20 of my lineups have 2 players different from every other lineup. If any of my top 20 lineups don't meet that criteria, well, it has, 500 lineups in total to sift through to find that. So here our lowest lineup is 21. So that means it skipped a lineup. That means somewhere along this line, there were 2 lineups that shared more than 8 out of 9, that shared 8 out of 9 players. So it's like, hey, we're going to skip this one and we're going to go to the next best lineup. So it's actually lineup 8, right? So here we have lineup 7 and then we have lineup 9, right? So what happens here is it's like, hey, lineup 8 shares more than, or has 8 players similar to one of the other 20 lineups. So we're just going to skip that one and we're going to go in instead and use lineup 21, right? That's what the mini uniques is doing. It's going further down in your pool to meet those requirements. So that's what's up there. The way I'm determining where to set that number is I'm basically watching my aggregate metrics and my exposures and my leverages and making sure, one, I'm not sacrificing too much ROI or too much projection. And then I'm making sure I'm happy with the exposures that I'm seeing. So like right now, this feels like a little bit too much exposure for me. 100% Pippin, 90% Dort, 90% Bam, 70% E. I think these leverages I'm letting the builder do it in an organic way, right? I'm allowing the builder to prioritize the best lineups, but still get me more spread out, right? So I'm using the uniques to do that. So I'm going to crank it up here to 5. We were at like 500 ROI. Now we're down to like 300. I actually do like my leverages and exposures a lot better, but I feel like we might have sacrificed a little too much ROI. So I'm going to go back to 4, where we're back up to like 400%. This doesn't feel as bad. Dort still leverage, but like 2x exposure compared to ownership. Bam is like 2x exposure compared to ownership. Even Pippin is about 2x, right? So some guidelines I'll use is like trying to be within like 2 to 3x exposure compared to a player's ownership. Here I'm on the little bit of the lower end because I don't really have any opinions about these players. If you feel strongly about some play, or you're like, I really like this guy, okay, like be closer to the 3x side. Like it's totally fine. Me, a little less opinionated here. I'm going to say like I'd rather be closer to the 2x side. So yeah, I sacrificed some ROI to get some diversification. That's normal, but I'm still happy with it. I like these exposures and leverages better. Most of our top exposures are all Memphis, and that's a result of John Morant being out. He's a huge usage player on their team. So this makes a lot of sense to me. So I'd be a lot happier with what I'm seeing now at 4 uniques than what I was seeing at 1 unique. But this is how I'd be building lineups for the 4-game NBA main slate, starting a little in, about 40 minutes here. And at this point, I really wouldn't want to tweak anything else. You totally can if you want to, right? You want to set some more minimax exposures. You want to look at like your stacks, or you want to use less uniques, more uniques, like totally up to you. But for me, this is a good stopping point. I'd be ready to save these lineups and upload them to my contest. All right. Good stuff there. We are caught up with questions in the chats here and Discord, and we knocked out a slate demo. So appreciate you guys tuning in. I'll be back Monday, 4 p.m. Eastern for our next show. So until then, everybody, take care. Good luck. Thanks. Bye.